Welcome to this lesson. Today we are going through statistics, and the question that we have reads: the marks obtained by 50 students in a class is shown below. We have a table showing the marks and the frequency. Then from this information you are required to determine the mode, the interquartile range, the quartile deviation, the pass mark if 65% of the students were to pass. So let us look at the solution. And the first part of the question requires us to determine the mode, and we know the mode is the most appearing number, and the mark that is appearing most is the mark that was scored by 16 students, and therefore the mode is going to be 50. The mode is going to be 50 marks. We move to part B of the question. And part B requires us to calculate the interquartile range. And for us to be able to calculate the interquartile range, we need to modify the table above as follows. So we are going to have the marks. We are going to have the frequency. We are also going to have what we call cumulative frequency. In this case now, we have the marks from 30, we have 40, we have 50, we have 60, we have 70, and lastly 80. We also have the frequency the way it is. We have a frequency of 3, we have 4, we have 16, we have 14, we have 8, and lastly we have 5. Then of course now the cumulative frequency comes from the frequency where we begin with the first frequency, which is 3. Then 3 plus 4 you get 7. 7 plus 16 you get 23. 23 plus 14 you get 37. 37 plus 8 you get 45. And 45 you add 5, you are going to get a total of 50. After doing that now, for us to get the interquartile range, the interquartile range is usually obtained by taking the upper quartile, which is Q3, we minus the lower quartile, which is Q1. And in this case now, let us get the lower quartile, Q1. Let us get the lower quartile, which is Q1. And Q1 is usually a quarter of the total frequency. And the total frequency we have is 50. So if you take a quarter of 50, this one gives us 12.5. So this is like 12.5 mark. So what you do, once you get 12.5 where our lower quartile lies, go to the cumulative frequency, then check where we have 12.5. 12.5 is going to lie in 23 since 7 is lower than 12.5. So at 23, the marks that correspond with the lower quartile are 50. And in this case now, the Q1 is represented by the 50 marks. Then next now we go to what we call the upper quartile Q3, and to get where Q3 lies, the upper quartile is usually 3/4 of the total frequency, and the total frequency is 50, and if you take 3/4 of 50, you get 37.5. So this is the mark where our lower where our upper quartile lies. And in this case now, if you check in our cumulative frequency where that 7.5 lies, our 37.5 lies in 45, since 37 is lower than 37.5. So our 37.5 is going to lie in 45, and the marks that correspond to 45 is 70, and therefore we are going to have 70 marks. So since we have our lower and the upper quartile, now we can get the interquartile range. And in this case now, the interquartile range is going to be equal to the upper quartile, which is 70, minus the lower quartile, which is 50, and this one gives us 20 marks. That is part B. Then we are going to part C. And in part C, we are supposed to calculate what we call the quartile deviation. We are supposed to calculate the quartile deviation. And the quartile deviation is usually given by the interquartile range you divide by 2. In other words, the quartile deviation is half of the interquartile range. And in this case now, we have the interquartile range, which is 20. And if you take 20, you divide by 2, we have 10. And in this case now, we are going to have 10 marks. Then of course now we go to part D. And part D is where we are supposed now to calculate the pass mark. That is, determine the pass mark if 65% of the students were to pass. What we are going to do here is that we have to calculate 65% of the total number of students. That is 65% of 50. And this one here is going to give us 32.5. Once we have our 32.5, you go to the cumulative frequency, then look at where that 2.5 lies, and that 2.5 and 32.5 is going to lie in 37, and therefore if you look at the mark that corresponds with 37, we are going to have 60 marks, and therefore now the pass mark is going to be 60. Thank you for watching and welcome to the channel.